Welcome to the Visionary Show on Jaron Lucas Live. This is a live stream show where you and I interview tech founders who have recently raised capital and are literally in the process of creating the future we will live in. With me today is James Wu, the CEO of InnerSpace. James, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about what you guys are doing, and I think that this is going to be a very interesting conversation for any entrepreneurs, investors, people who are looking at the tech space. Why don't you tell me real quick a little bit about your background and InnerSpace?
Yeah. My background, I came from a technology background. I did a number of degrees in computer science when I was in university. So I was an academic for the first little bit. I decided that there were more interesting things going on at the time out in industry. So I left to become a product strategist and working with increasingly interesting tech businesses that were building new things as the internet was kind of coming online and becoming what it is today. From a career perspective, I started becoming more and more interested in earlier and earlier stage companies, simply because the magnitude and the nature of the challenges they face are much more interesting than what you might get at a well established and stable company. So I found myself moving from 800 people companies to 400 people companies to 5 people companies until I started my own in 2014. So at some point in 2014, I was out and about and kind of recognized that I couldn't really imagine a future where location data, the way you get outdoors with GPS, where it powers these services and all of these business experience. I couldn't imagine how a world would exist in the future where that same level of data didn't exist indoors. And it struck me as weird that it didn't already, even in 2014. And that got me thinking about all of the opportunity that kind of technology could represent, and got me digging into all of the challenges to that technology existing at the time. And it set me down the path that I'm on today.
Wow, yeah. And to date, you have raised almost $4 million. Which is impressive to say the least. And I think the space that you're in is really interesting to me because the online and offline worlds they still feel very disconnected. And, you see little by little, I know smart home has obviously been a growing trend, and that's one that I play around with a lot. I'm curious about what the current use cases you guys are seeing within InnerSpace are right now.
Yeah, I think InnerSpace does sit at that nexus between the online and the offline world, and specifically as a technology that can bridge those two pieces. And it's as the physical world starts to become more and more dependent on digital, the reverse conversation has not yet been as enabled as maybe it could be. So how does the digital world have an awareness of the physical? And that's where we are starting to provide a lot of value to different people. So how does you hear a lot of people talking about smart buildings. How does a smart building have an awareness of its occupants and where they're spending time and what they're doing and how many people are there? And, how can it use that data to, tune or adjust HVAC levels or adjust lighting levels or lock doors or do any of the things that they talk about a smart building being valuable at doing?
Yeah, it seems like a pretty critical component of it, knowing how many people are in there, knowing where they are. I don't mean to cut you off here, but I am really curious on that topic. How many companies are actually using that today, or maybe it's building owners? Like how big is that at the moment?
Well, people talk about smart buildings a lot more than people actually operate smart buildings, simply because it's really early days of the technology being around to enable it. So there are some amazing examples of what should best be classified as like bespoke smart buildings. But the reality is, yeah, I mean, maybe if you're in the valley, or maybe if you're in one of the cities that happens to have one of these bespoke buildings, you've walked into them. The reality is 99% of the people that you've ever met have never walked into a building that had any real level of smarts enabled in it.
That's amazing. And that has to be really exciting for you guys, because I know from my own experience, running companies, advising different companies, you really want to be that first company to market. So it sounds like here, you guys are actually in a really good position to, be having those early conversations with building owners, really showing them the technology now, so that as that trend continues, which I have to imagine that that's one of the changes that'll happen over the next 5 years. What do you think there?
I mean, I would hope so, because obviously we're impatient to sort of see this revolution happen. Given what I've learned over the past little while with certain more traditional businesses like real estate, like property management, sometimes these things move a little bit more slowly in these verticals than in others. Um, but it is super exciting to be at the sort of the forefront of it, and at this stage where it's the world is your oyster, so to speak. At the same time, it can be very, very frustrating, because trying to blaze trails is a lot harder than seeing a trail in front of you and figuring out how to make that trail better.
It's so true. You usually have to wait about twice as long as you want, and then there's this just like pit of hell that you have to go through in the middle of it.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you guys are really, really, you have good timing on that. It's also interesting too. There was an article that came out today, that talks about BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, and he announced that their whole fund is going to be now moving over to only supporting investments that maintain the UN's 2% or 2-degree climate change factor, which means that they're not only selling their investments in coal, I believe oil and all other fossil fuels, but you would have to think that a trend like that could be very monumental into the push towards more renewable energy buildings. Like, you think about how that might actually impact real estate.
Mhm.
And if building owners, especially as we've seen more and more buildings become owned by these gigantic Wall Street funds,
Mhm.
if that push is really coming from the investors themselves, I would think that really in the next few years that would bode really well for what you guys are doing in that one vertical, which I know that that's one of many ways that your technology can be used. So maybe on that note, what are some of the areas in digital marketing that people should look at InnerSpace and just this general overlap between uh, you know devices, tech devices that are more like in person, with the digital world?
Um,
That was a mouthful. I apologize, but
yeah, I'm
hopefully
trying.
that
I'm
made
trying to.
sense.
I'm trying to tease that one out. Like, I mean, digital marketing when is one of those things that it's a necessary evil online. Obviously, I mean, a lot of the experiences you get online are free, and therefore marketing and advertising is something that powers it. As the awareness of people in the physical space and what they do, and as more and more of that data is able to be kind of cross over into the digital world, it's certainly going to power more and more of that fine tuning and fine tuned targeting for marketers online. Where I think we see some really interesting, and slightly different and maybe slightly less invasive opportunities for marketers, and for more generally the marketers, people who are looking at data to try and you know find opportunities in their business to drive revenue, is in understanding behavior in physical spaces and being able to have technology that enables you to almost do like A/B testing in your physical space. So
Oh, wow.
anybody who has run a website knows what A/B testing is. You try two configurations, you observe the results, and then you go with the one that was successful. What we have enabled a lot of our customers to do, particularly customers who are operating, say, we don't really go into typical retail, but we do have a number of customers who are in food service retail, like retail food service establishments. They use the data to say, well, what if I change the menu? What if I try this promotion? What if I move to the chef stand from here to there? How does that change this particular metric I'm looking at as to, around the number of people that come into my cafe, or the number of people relative to the number of sales that I've got? How do all these changes impact these metrics that I now have a capability to measure, whereas before I didn't? And it's not exactly traditional marketing, but it serves the same goal, right? Trying to drive business and revenue up.
Yeah, well, that sounds incredibly important, because I know that in digital marketing, if you're not A/B testing, then you're probably not making money.
Yeah.
And as the world gets smarter and smarter, you would really want to bring those tactics, which are working so well in digital marketing, to the real world. So that makes perfect sense, that particular concept and using it that way.
And
What?
I'll just comment. One of the things that is very interesting, like, we've always had the ability to look at the point of sale numbers. Have I made more sales, or have I lost? Have I made more money? Have I lost? Have my sales gone down? But in the physical world, what you don't have is the insight that you have online, which is, where did I lose the sale, and where did people kind of go astray? And online and in websites, you get to see those pathways, and in the physical world, you don't, unless you're looking at location data the way we enable some of our customers to.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, switching topics for a minute here, I know, as I had mentioned before, you guys have raised almost $4 million. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the people who are going to be watching this are entrepreneurs and are either in that process, or they're thinking about raising capital for a company. What can you tell me about, your own capital raising processes? Because I think you've done a couple of rounds now, and really, what kind of advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are watching this?
Yeah, I think my first advice is, it's really, really hard. It's so easy to look around and hear all of the stories that are out there, and think everybody can just walk out and raise millions and millions of dollars. And that's not true. It's really hard to do. And it involves, it is, people say it's a full-time job, and it's kind of cliche, but it absolutely is. So if you're struggling to do it, and you're finding it way harder than you ever thought, that's pretty much how everybody finds it. And the only way to do it is to keep going regardless of how daunting it seems. I think in our experience, we were a little bit fortunate in that I had some connections into an angel fund that were very eager to support me, because they knew me personally, and they had a lot of trust in me. And I think that's where early capital tends to come from. It's investments from early investors are much more driven by personality and sort of belief in the person than they are belief in the business or even any metrics. And so when I talk to early entrepreneurs who are a few years behind where we are now, and they're asking, like, how do I get in front of VCs, and how do you cold call them, and how do you do this? My advice would be, like, you don't. I mean, you might sort of win the lottery, but generally speaking, you're probably barking up the wrong tree. For the earliest money, you've got to be going to friends, family, pushing your network, and finding people who know you personally and can vouch for you personally, because otherwise you're spending a lot of cycles and spending a lot of your very limited energy on something that is very unlikely to play out for you.
That's so true. That reminds me of a phrase I've been hearing recently from friends, which is relationships matter. Mm-hmm. And I think over the last 10 years, a lot of us tech people have kind of fallen into this thinking where it's like, how can I automate everything? I mean, that is my personal mantra, but aside from that, how can we automate everything? How can we make relationships not matter? How can we let merit stand for itself, et cetera, et cetera? And what I find is that, especially it feels like over the last 3 years, it just feels like people care a lot more about relationships. So like you're saying in the VC community, I think we did kind of in that 2012 to 2015 timeframe, it was a lot easier to raise capital because people were willing to bet on an idea from someone who they don't know much more than it seems like they're willing to today. And that whole thing has moved much more into the incubators and like very, very, very early stage investment groups. Whereas I'm curious what you're seeing in kind of like the Series A world. And I don't know, are you guys raising Series A or Series B right now?
So we're gearing up to do A. So we're not quite there yet in terms of the metrics that we would like to have. So we're currently looking at a bridge round to add a few, just add a little bit more time in order for us to hit some of the metrics that we believe we're going to be able to hit before the end of the year. So we're still before Series A, but even today, I'm having conversations with people who are looking at this bridge round. People who are looking at a bridge round today are people who they're doing so because they intend to be there at the A round, and they want to get in a little bit early with a smaller check so that they can start to build that relationship, so that they can start to see the person and get that confidence and that trust that they will need even at A round to be able to place that bet. I think you said something. You said something really interesting about metrics and around let merit stand for itself. I think that at B, C, D, all of those rounds, there is merit to look at. But even at A round, it's still really, really early days. And if you as a startup can go and say, I've just made all of this revenue and here are my amazing metrics, well, then merit can stand for itself. But if you're in that position, you're not raising seed. When you're raising seed, you actually don't have anything except your own reputation and your own idea and your own ability to convince someone to trust you.
Mm-hmm. And for people out there who might be just starting to think about raising a seed round or in these earlier stages, what would you say investors are looking at for companies between seed, bridge, and Series A right now in this market?
I think investors, it's one thing to have the golden metrics that everybody can just makes it an easy investment. I think what investors are really looking for at this stage is to see that you have figured out your business. And maybe the sales aren't there yet. Maybe all of the engagement metrics aren't there yet. But they want to see that you have broken down all of the mechanics of your business sufficiently to understand how you are going to operate it. That you understand, if I turn this little wheel this fast, it's going to generate these kinds of things. And if I, approach these kinds of people with this kind of message, I have this kind of success rate. It's really that they want, if you think about a company as being a machine, they want to know that you kind of read the instructions, you've internalized the instructions, and now you're ready to start figuring out, can this machine do the job?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it, actually. And it reflects something that I see in a lot of early stage entrepreneurs, which is, I guess, not having done quite enough research on the industry that they're in, and then from that actually well defining a game plan. And both of those are so important. They're kind of like the first things where a lot of times when someone starts kind of starting a company, they come in with this vision, and a lot of times people block out. I don't know if you've seen this with other people as well, but a lot of times they kind of block out the negative criticism, and that exact criticism is usually the thing that will get them onto like the actual idea that people want to buy. And from that, a game plan that you've actually formulated, like how many people am I going to need to hire for this, who what actually needs to be built, what's the most minimum version of the product. And you of course hear the word MVP a lot, but actually defining like how are you going to bring that MVP to market and get it to customers is something that I find a lot of entrepreneurs kind of miss.
Yeah, I think there is it takes a certain kind of person to be an entrepreneur, to want to be an entrepreneur, to have the vision. The show is the visionary show, but to have the vision to see this thing could be this. And I think one of the challenges that certainly I had early on, and I know other entrepreneurs that I've talked to have had, is they're selling to people who don't necessarily have that same. They've got other capabilities. I'm not. This is not a sort of a slight in any way, but some people can see 5, 6, 7 steps ahead, and it's immediately obvious to them why this is valuable. But they're trying to sell people who don't necessarily have that capability. They're highly skilled in other ways, but if they don't have that capability, well, then you have to figure out how do you get someone to see your vision in the way you do. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially until they have figured out, oh, I'm talking to people who can't see it the same way I do. Until you figure that out, it can be very frustrating because you're like, why don't they see this amazing thing the way I see it? And you have to step back and recognize it's because some people aren't built that way, and you need to take them by a hand and really, provide the stepping stones from where they are to where to where you are. And that trip, it was one step for you, but it might be 8 for them.
That's such a great point. What kind of advice could you give to an entrepreneur who, I mean, really what you're saying applies to everyone, right? And maybe 5% of people have mastered the art of storytelling and understand that people need to be told things. The people aren't coming into this with all of the knowledge that they themselves have. What kind of advice could you give to entrepreneurs just in how they even should be explaining their idea to investors and other people?
Yeah, I think it's a fine line between being humble and being able to express the reality and be comfortable with expressing the reality that you don't know everything yet, and you don't have to know everything yet, because that's part of the journey from getting from those very early seed deals and the pre-seed deals to A and beyond. Is part of the purpose of that journey is to figure it out. So if you walk into a conversation and pretend like you've seen it all and you know it all, exactly how this is going to go, I think investors see right through that stuff. At the same time, and they sort of see the bluster and they say, like, this person is not ready yet. At the same time, if you don't show enough confidence and enough belief, and you don't paint a big enough picture of how big the market you're going after could be, or how revolutionary the technology you are envisioning will be, then you can't get them excited. So it's this fine line of being, I guess, open enough and vulnerable enough to say, yeah, these are things that I know and these are things that I don't know. But what I do know is this thing's amazing.
Wow. Yeah. And real quick, this is a live stream. So if you're watching the show live right now, feel free to ask any questions in the chat to James, and we'll answer them as long as they're not completely ridiculous. I'm kidding here. We will definitely ask them. And also, if you are catching this in a replay, make sure you subscribe. We cover topics such as entrepreneurs, what kind of insight they have to help you start a company, as well as everything from consciousness to how to grow and market a company. All of these things that are really important if you're thinking about doing that. So make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell so you know when I'm coming live again. Now, James, I want to switch topics real quick here, and I want to move on to the future of your space. And I want to look 10 or 20 years ahead and just get your predictions, your insight on where you think your space might be heading.
Yeah,
what does that world look like? Really, is what I'm curious about.
I wish I could tell you I knew exactly what this world looks like. What excites me every day is when I talk with a new customer or a new potential customer, or I even just tell somebody I've met about what it is I do and the company I'm trying to build. Everybody has all of these crazy and inspiring and amazingly interesting ideas about what that world, about what some slice of that world could look like. And when I started building this company, my ideas were limited to like, oh, look, imagine you could pull out your phone and navigate the subways or the mall or what have you. And now I look at those ideas and go like, that is the least interesting thing I can think of, right? Where we are at today is doing things like talking with the Department of Homeland Security about how can we use this technology to better equip first responders when they're approaching the scene of an emergency in a building. God forbid it's an active shooting scene or some kind of other disaster that's happened. How can we better equip them to have real-time visibility into where are the people in the building that need to help? How can we give them better tools that can help the command and control who are sort of outside the space and trying to coordinate a multi-teamed response? How can we give them visibility into where all of their team members are so that they can sort of mount a much more effective response to the situation, right? Those are the kind of things that 3 years ago never even, that potential never even occurred to me. And so
I think the first responder space is actually a really interesting one. And the reason why I say that is because you're the second person in the last week who has mentioned that to me. I was at CES here in Las Vegas a week ago, and I was invited to this dinner, really more like a cocktail reception with 15 of the top CEOs in the automation and robotics space. And one of the ideas that they even mentioned that I think people are starting to talk about is this idea of like taking drones, and you could have drones that are over traffic, kind of directing people where to go in the case of any sort of disaster. And that's just one idea that I'm not even sure if a company is working on. So if you're watching this video right now and looking for an idea, just go sell to governments. Jeff Bezos made a lot of money that way. But, I think we're really just tipping the top of the iceberg here with that, because I mean, that's one really interesting idea. What you're talking about makes so much sense. And these are just two ideas in kind of that first responder area that people seem to just be starting to think about.
Yeah, what amazed me is that there isn't something better than what they have today already, right? I mean, quite literally, a advanced technology in this first responder space that we learned recently is the ability for the radios that the police use to be able to talk to the radios that the fire brigade uses. Like, who would have thought that that's a problem, but it is. So there's a lot of opportunity in that space for sure. And there's a lot of value in that space, maybe not monetary value, but nobody ever argues about, should you invest in protecting somebody's home? Should you invest in responding to these terrible situations that happen with active shooters or what have you? Like, of course you should, and there's huge value there. And the fact that there isn't better technology to support it is incredible sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know your background is also in the product side of tech, and I think this is a side that a lot of people struggle with specifically, and for good reason too. It's challenging, right? It's you are I think at the beginning, kind of guessing what people might want, how they might want to use a platform or whatever product you're creating is. And with that, I'm curious what kind of insight you would give entrepreneurs. I believe your background is mostly in SaaS and digital products. So with that, what are some of the insights, mistakes you see people make, and general advice that you would give to entrepreneurs as they kind of dive into product?
Yeah, I think one of the most important characteristics you can embody as somebody who is building, designing product for human beings is empathy, right? And sometimes empathy, particularly when in the context of somebody, a hard charging, business building kind of person, sometimes empathy is kind of hard to come by. Because you're driven and you're smart and you know all the things, and it's very difficult for you to kind of step back and realize that not everybody is like you. So having empathy to be able to turn off your own ambition, turn off your own sort of get out of your own world for a minute and see how other people interact with things is possibly the most important characteristic of somebody who wants to build successful product, and whether it's digital product or physical product, or frankly even businesses themselves, right? I mean, a business is, if you squint just right, a business is just some big complex product that you sell to the world. So it's empathy to understand how other people might look at the things that you build, and get out of your own way and get out of that belief that other people will or should and will look at it the way you intend them to look at it.
Yeah. And what are some of the ways that you go about getting that kind of feedback?
Yeah. I listen a lot. I make an intentional point to try and listen to people more than I talk. Maybe I may not be coming through on this podcast, but you did bring me here to talk.
Yes, we did.
So I listen. So I try and listen a lot, and truly hear about the things that people are saying they struggle with, or truly listen to the things that people say they have problems with and wish there were solutions for. It's so easy to you get, if you tune in, you probably hear 10 times a day somebody say they're irritated with this, or they wish this was different, or they can't believe how stupid this thing is and why nobody's fixed it of late. And it's so easy just to let those things pass you by. But all of those things are opportunities to build a better product, or to improve, to build a new product, or to improve an existing product.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really great point that you make around listening, and it happens to be something that most entrepreneurs are by nature bad at. So just getting in that habit, for me, meditation has helped a lot with this, because in my experience, there's a certain amount of anxiety that's involved with that. Not listening. It I think correlates to your ego. You have an idea, you want to make sure that you're heard, but at the same time, maybe like a vulnerability that entrepreneurs sometimes have, that they might be wrong, which is something that you mentioned, or that people might say no, which they never want to hear. And so, just getting really comfortable with, for me, it was really getting comfortable with silence, and getting comfortable with the fact that some people, exactly like you said, not everyone's going to think the same way as me and any other entrepreneur out there. And so just being willing to hear what other people think, taking that in, and being open to making the change. And that this really isn't a meditation episode, but I think that is an important point that meditation can offer entrepreneurs, which is I would say a fundamental point of it is, instead of thinking about what you want, or what you would like the world to be, it's just accepting it for what it is. And there's a kind of a term which is be.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, when you get comfortable with the fact that, like, other people have this opinion, the way they, they are the way they are, your product is the way it is, and just being comfortable with that fact of the fact that it isn't perfect and other people might have insight on that, is extremely, extremely powerful.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that you need, as an entrepreneur, to keep your eye on what are you really trying to do. if you're building, if you're building the proverbial better mousetrap, and you have this amazing idea, I mean, you're building it for a reason. You're building it because presumably you want to build a company around this better mousetrap. And if everybody's telling you like that's not the way mousetraps can work, you have a choice. You can double down on your own insistence that your amazing idea is valuable, and your business will fail because nobody's going to buy it. Or you can keep your eye on the real goal here, which was to build a business around selling mousetraps. And so if people are giving you feedback and you're not listening, you're kind of stubbornly losing sight of what you're actually trying to do, and you're losing the forest for the trees.
Well, what's really funny about that too is a lot of times the person who's giving an entrepreneur feedback, it might be the only person that's actually a potential buyer or user of their product, the only person who's maybe from that industry. And I know that this happened to me once with my first startup, which was an online ticketing startup back when like crowdfunding was kind of all the rage, crowdfunding ticketing platform. And everyone I met told me this is such a great idea, Jaron. And it was the one person who was actually in the music industry who, and we had a few people in the music industry who were interested, like wanted to partner with us and whatnot. But I just remember this one friend of mine who was in that industry, and she told me, Jaron, this is never going to work. And she told me why. And so I think that it's very common. That's a personal story, but I think it's very common that entrepreneurs are often talking about their ideas to their friends, to people who they know, but like aren't actually potential buyers of the product. And that is really who you need to get feedback from. As you know, this is more of just me ranting.
Yeah, I've had very, very similar experiences. Right, there are complexities in any business or in any sort of business context that, unless you are deeply immersed in it, you could never know. I mean, we have explored for quite some time opportunities that we saw related to our platform in the housekeeping, like commercial cleaning services. And on paper and in theory, it makes all the sense in the world. And anybody who, if they knew just enough about it, but nowhere near enough nowhere near much they needed to know, they would look at it and go, this is brilliant. But the reality is, unless you know about how commercial cleaning contracts are structured, unless you understand about the turnover rate and the challenges around managing, staff in these kind of business contexts, you would never ever know that that kind of solution is going to be way, way harder to be successful than you think.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully that can help some entrepreneur out there. So as we start to wrap this episode up, I know you have a lot of insight that would be useful to entrepreneurs out there. So, my final question for you is, what is one piece of advice that you would give to entrepreneurs who might be watching this out there?
I think you have to balance. I would say make sure you have a balanced perspective and balanced expectations going into it. On the one hand, you can't go into you're not going to walk away from your job and invest all this time and effort and money and blood, sweat, and tears into something that you don't 100% believe is true. At the same time, don't 100% believe is true, and 100% believe can be massive. If you don't 100% believe it, don't bother. It's way too hard, way too painful if you don't have that belief. At the same time, set the expectation that it is going to be harder than you think, and that it's going to take longer than you think, and that all the Ubers and the Facebooks and all the crazy billion-dollar startups that you see popping up, that seem to pop up every single day. Those guys, there was a lot of work that happened long before you ever heard of Facebook, long before you ever heard of Uber, and it doesn't happen overnight. And so if you can balance those expectations while still staying motivated and still sticking to your belief that what you're doing is valuable and what you're doing can be huge, then you'll make it. But if you let them get out of out of check, if you lose confidence in the idea, or you become frustrated and impatient with how quickly you can make that idea become reality, it's just, that's one extra pressure that could sort of collapse the house.
I think that's a really important insight. First, to focus on something big. And a lot of times, and I really believe that this comes from generally a place of low self-esteem. But a lot of founders focus on very, very small problems. And the fact is that as you're kind of mentioning here, it takes the same amount of time to focus on a small problem or a big problem. So do something that's big, even if it's a cash flow business. That it's not a big tech company. It's just a cash flow business. Like, make sure it's big enough. You look at the market, understand that you're not going to have the entire market, and be realistic about what can be accomplished, and make sure it's big enough to merit your time. And then, as you mentioned, secondly, everything's going to take twice as long as possible. And I think that is actually one of the most important pieces of advice for a startup founder, because anytime your CTO tells you how long something's going to take to build, multiply it by 2. Anytime someone who you're going to do a business deal with tells you how long they think it's going to take to close the deal, multiply it by 2. That multiply by 2 factor seems to almost be a law of nature. And so I think it's very interesting that you point that out. And I think that is actually very, very important for especially new entrepreneurs to know.
It's good for your mental health, but it's also good for planning, right? Like, if you are fortunate enough to be able to raise funds, or to have somebody who's in a conversation with you about raising funds, you got to be realistic that if you think that this, your $250,000 is you're going to be able to get to this milestone in 4 months or 8 months or however long it's going to last you, think about that 2 times factor. Will it really get you there? Or what do you have to do to pull that timeline in such that you have enough runway?
Definitely applicable to capital raising too. That's for sure. I know in my own experience, raising capital for my previous company, as well as all the founders I've advised in it, the number, again, it's a law of nature. It's always multiplied by 2. And, we're all in a rush to get it over with, but we need to actually plan for that time scale. And so I think that, that's huge. Well, James, thank you so much for joining. This has been an incredibly interesting chat to have with you, and I'm excited about what you guys are doing. So I wish you the best of luck. Thank you. I would love to have you on again sometime whenever you're ready. And I hope to speak with you soon.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. And it was a great conversation. Very interesting to hear your side of, your journey and your perspective on what we're doing. So I'd be happy to come back.
Appreciate it. And for those of you at home who are watching, thank you so much for tuning into the live stream. You guys are awesome. And I hope you learned something interesting from this conversation as well. I know I got a lot of insight out of James. And if you're catching a replay, make sure you subscribe, click the notification button. I'm going live every Monday through Thursday. And YouTube will tell you that, when I'm going live, if you do that. And then also be sure to give this video a like if you thought this video was interesting at all to you, because that'll help us rank higher in Google's algorithm on YouTube. And I wish you all the best of luck. Have a great rest of your day. And until next time, stay visionary.